Hello, everyone. This is my thoughts on the civil war that's going on in the Conservative Party of Canada that's taking place between Andrew Scheer and Maxime Bernier. First, I just want to say I'm sorry I've been off for so long. I'm actually in the process of moving right now, so it's been a little difficult to be able to post any videos lately. But once I get all settled, I'll be back to doing it on a more regular basis. But with what's going on in the Conservative Party right now is that I'm a little late to put my commentary out, but as by now most people are aware, Maxime Bernier decided that he was not going to be a part of the Conservative Party anymore. He left it. And this was just as the Conservatives were going to their policy convention down in Halifax. Now, for a while, Maxime Bernier has been butting heads with the leader, Andrew Scheer. Maxime Bernier lost out to Andrew Scheer, not by a large margin. It was just by a whisker. Really, it really could have gone either way. And there's been a lot of people who have said that it was most likely that the leadership was stolen by Andrew Scheer by these dairy cartels, that they ended up buying their PC membership, or I guess that would be the Conservative Party membership. They ended up buying them so that way they could vote in Andrew Scheer, because Maxime Bernier was against the idea of supply management and Andrew Scheer was in favor of supply management. But ever since then, Maxime Bernier, he's been putting out on Twitter a lot as to some of the problems that he has with the current political climate, especially when it comes to the Conservative Party. Now, I'm actually in favor of this because I think it's difficult to criticize your own party. It's difficult to criticize those you support. It's easy to criticize the opposite side. For instance, it's very easy for any conservative, to criticize Justin Trudeau. Not only is there a lot to criticize, but he's the opposition to the Conservatives, so it makes sense. But when it comes to actually criticizing your own people, then it gets a lot more difficult. This is actually something that I have respected about Maxime Bernier and what he's done. To me, he's coming from a much more populist platform, really wants to do what he believes that the Canadian people want. And with the schism going down, there's been two sides to everything that's going on. Some people are saying that this has to do with Maxime Bernier's ego, that this is why he broke off, because he couldn't handle losing to Andrew Scheer, and ever since then he really hasn't had too much of a voice in the party. For me, one of the reasons that I have more support for Maxime Bernier than I do over Andrew Scheer is Andrew Scheer is a very establishment politician. He's not very different he's not much different in a lot of his policies than even what Justin Trudeau wants, but even your average politician out there, he's not much different. Maxime Bernier is a different politician. Some of the things that he's spoken about in the past, such as he's talked about the problems that we face, include concerning the Bank of Canada. For those who don't know, that it was Pierre Elliott Trudeau who, in I believe it was 1974, began borrowing from international banks rather than borrowing from the Bank of Canada. Now, the difference is if we were borrowing for the Bank of Canada, they could loan out this money to us with no interest rate. But when you borrow from these international banks, such as the Bank of International Settlement, the problem is that they charge you crazy interest rates, and much of our debt has skyrocketed ever since then. There's some graphs that are available out there that you can see that sort of explain this. And it's happened ever since Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Every other Canadian Prime Minister, both Conservative and Liberal, have borrowed from these international banks, and that's one of the reasons we have such a high debt right now, along with our ridiculous spending on all sorts of unnecessary programs, unnecessary giving away money to different nations. So this is something that Maxime Bernier has spoken about in the past. But even when we look at what the Conservatives want, their plan is a much more moderate version to some of the stuff that Justin Trudeau wants. When we even talk about the immigration crisis, Michelle Rempel has been somebody that has for a long time criticized the Ahmed Hussein, Bill Blair, all these immigration ministers that are in Trudeau's cabinet. Of course, for a long time it was just Ahmed Hussein, but that's more or less changed. Now we have Bill Blair, whose focus is on the border crisis, border security. But even when we look at what she wants, she really doesn't want anything too much different. She just wants a more moderate plan than what the Liberals want, where a lot of Canadians are not happy with the state of current immigration. They don't like the massive immigration that's going on. For instance, one report that came out a few months ago was detailing about how when Canadians were told the actual numbers of immigration, their support for it dropped significantly. And this is because most people thought that the numbers were around 100,000, which still people thought was kind of high. But when they found out the numbers was actually 260,000 every year, then their support really dropped. And this number wants to be increased by Justin Trudeau. He wants 1 million over 3 years. And this is not really a good way to integrate new people into the country if you're just going to bring them in. This is also why in several cities across Canada, we have such a housing crisis right now, where we have so many people that need places to want to buy homes or even rent homes and apartments. But it's really competitive out there right now because we're bringing in so many people, and there's not much that we can do about it. So when it comes to Maxime Bernier, I support him because he goes on a much more populist platform. Now, many people try and condemn populism, but populism, all it is listening to what the people want of your nation. And this is something that politics is supposed to be based around, but for a long time, this is not what it's been. It's been about the politicians doing what they want, doing whatever they can to stay in power, and it doesn't really matter what the Canadian people want. I mean, there's plenty of programs that get pushed by the government that don't really have much support in the way of the people. And this is actually one of the things that, one of the problems with supply management. A significant number of Canadians across all political spectrums, whether you happen to be on the right, the left, they actually are willing to put up supply management for these NAFTA negotiations that we're facing right now. But both Andrew Scheer and Justin Trudeau are supporting supply management, which is just going to put a wrench into our trade deals with the U.S. As much as it sucks to say, we can't really stand toe-to-toe in a trade war with the U.S. I wish we could, but we just don't have the resources or the people that America has. But this is something that Bernier wants to scrap. Now, many people are being critical of Bernier that this has to do about his ego, that he's splitting the right-wing vote, and don't get me wrong, splitting the right-wing vote is a danger that we face right now, because if you do that, it'll make it much more difficult to defeat Justin Trudeau in the 2019 election. So this is a risk that is being played. But many people are already saying that if Trudeau wins, then Bernier is responsible for the loss by Andrew Scheer. But Andrew Scheer is just not a very strong leader. He is not a man of his principles. There's many things that he says he supports, but then whenever push comes to shove, he backs down. This is a man who talks about how he is committed to free speech, and free speech is something that we don't actually have in Canada. Even though we like to say in our Constitution it's free expression, it still has what they call reasonable limits to it. But Andrew Scheer, he's a man who says he supports free speech, and he also was talking about how he was thinking about cutting some funding to universities that don't support free speech. But then he's put Maxime Bernier on a backbench whenever he has spoken out. I mean, just a couple months ago, Maxime Bernier lost his position in the shadow cabinet, and this was because he was being critical of supply management and being critical of some of the things Scheer is doing. Probably the most recent example of how Scheer backs down on his principles is Scheer is a Roman Catholic, yet he says he wasn't going to open the abortion debate in Canada, which if you're a Roman Catholic, it probably is something you should do, especially considering how abortion is just used as a form of birth control these days. I mean, it's something about 1 in 3 to 1 in 4 pregnancies in Canada and an abortion. That's a pretty significant number that we're talking about. We're talking about 100,000 every single year. So it's at least something that should be worth debating. But most recently, at the Halifax Convention, it turned out that Andrew Scheer and his party were thinking about changing that in the Conservative Constitution to not make the Conservatives a pro-life party, but actually open the door to abortion. This is another example of how he's backing down on his own principles. We also have found out that since at the Halifax Convention, the dairy cartel, they were looking to they had a whole plan in place with different scenarios in order to save supply management, but it became very clear that Andrew Scheer, if it ever was put on the table, would veto any sort of action that could end supply management. So he really is in the pockets of these dairy cartels. This is not the free sort of democracy that we are supposed to have here in Canada. We're supposed to have more liberty than that, and our politicians are supposed to work for us. So Maxime Bernier ended up breaking off from the Conservative Party because of this. But the idea, too, that this has to do with Maxime Bernier's ego doesn't add up to me. See, one thing about it is the fact that Maxime Bernier is actually not helping his career by doing this. He had a pretty solid career in the Conservative Party, but he ended up sort of kiboshing that when he decided to leave. All he had to do was shut his mouth and stay quiet, and he would have had a very luxurious career in the Conservative Party. But he didn't do that. He was outspoken, and he decided that he was going to stand up for the Canadian principles. And he's talking about a lot of the things that we have a problem with. I mean, he's talked about the idea of multiculturalism, this extreme multiculturalism that Trudeau supports. But even this was receiving some lashback from his own, his fellow MPs. But this is actually something that a lot of Canadians have a concern about. And the other thing is, too, what I thought was very telling about the whole situation is the reactions of the Conservative Party when Maxime Bernier ended up leaving. See, a number of his fellow MPs were very quick to jump on and condemn him, were very quick to insult him and to disown him. This one example I have for this would be Michelle Rempel, when she came out and was pretty much saying that Maxime Bernier is lazy and that she really has no threat of him in a new party. And even somebody from the more provincial government, such as Lisa MacLeod, who I've stated in the past I'm not crazy about, she ended up coming in to condemn him as well. Now, the thing that I found was very interesting is these are two people, when we're talking about Michelle Rempel and we're talking about Lisa MacLeod, who like to criticize Trudeau for his identity politics game, but they engage in it in and of themselves. If you remember not too long ago, Lisa MacLeod was criticized by Ahmed Hussein, the immigration critic, the immigration minister, for being un-Canadian for the way that she was speaking about the border crossings. But then one thing that she's brought up recently, and she brought up at the time, had to do with him being a man who's criticizing her because she's a woman who disagrees with him. Michelle Rempel does a lot of the same thing on Twitter, and this is sort of the identity politics game that they're playing, because nothing about their genders has to do with what they're facing in politics. If they're being criticized, well, that's the way politics works. One side criticizes the other, and it just seems to me that they're hiding behind this idea that the fact that they're women means that they shouldn't be criticized, or at least that's how it comes off to me. So I've kind of found that Andrew Scheer has taken the party more to the left, and they're abandoning their principles. And this is something that I've noticed I've seemed to have a problem with when it comes to the people who are supporting Andrew Scheer to this day. There's a difference between supporting Andrew Scheer because you want to defeat Trudeau, but a lot of these people who are supporting Andrew Scheer are doing so because and they're refusing to call out any of his own corruption. They're not calling out on him abandoning his principles. They're not calling out him betraying the Canadian people to small interest groups. None of this comes up. They're quick to criticize Maxime Bernier, but nothing about Andrew Scheer. And sure, you could use some criticisms about Maxime Bernier. Some people say, why didn't he wait a year? I think that's actually a very valid argument that could be made, that maybe he could keep the party together until we could work at getting Trudeau out of office. But still, at the same time, they're not willing to call out anything that Andrew Scheer does. Another thing is, have you ever noticed how a lot of times the question period, a lot of their stuff is scripted? This is coming from the Conservatives, which means that everything has to be run through Andrew Scheer. So it's not really a party that is dedicated to free speech the way that they talk about. And a lot of people in Canada are looking for something different. We can see around the world how many people are right now going through their own political revolutions. It happened in America. Actually, in a lot of ways, I guess it kind of happened with Brexit in the UK first, although that's kind of fallen flat. It happened in America when they voted in Donald Trump. They were trying to go for a more populist platform. It happened in Italy because they were facing their own immigration crisis. And it nearly happened in France, too, with Marie Le Pen, although she lost out by a little bit to Macron. So all over the world, we're seeing these political revolutions, and it is finally coming to Canada. The Canadian people are getting fed up with the way that our politics is being run. And now, finally, we have a new voice in it, one who actually stands up and has a lot of, who stands up and speaks a lot for Canadian principles and what the Canadian people want. And let's not forget that a number of these people who have been voted in these political revolutions were told that they would never win. Well, that's not the way things have gone. So I think it's very possible that over the next year, Maxime Bernier, especially for how much support people have from all across the political spectrums. Sure, a lot of those people who are supporting him right now were Conservative Party voters, but even amongst Liberals and NDPs, there is support for Maxime Bernier, which means that we are in the midst of our own political revolution, and this is the time now in order to change things for the way that we want. And this is one of the reasons that I support Maxime Bernier. I actually, when I had always wanted Maxime Bernier to win the leadership race for the Conservatives last year, and he didn't, but I did like the way that he was outspoken. But the more and more that he spoke out, the more and more he was shunned by the political establishment, mostly speaking from the Conservative side right now. So when I look at these people that we have the options to have, we have Justin Trudeau, which we cannot afford to let Justin Trudeau get it another 4 years. And yes, this idea of Bernier leaving the Conservatives does sort of put a wrench in that. But we have Andrew Scheer, who is just a Trudeau light, even though his supporters still don't see it that way. His policies are really not that much different than Trudeau. He's still a globalist in every sense of the word. We have Jagmeet Singh, who has done, in my opinion, is actually worse than Trudeau, because his biggest criticism of Trudeau is that Trudeau's policies don't go far enough. And now we can have Maxime Bernier. Between all these options, I believe Maxime Bernier is the best option, because he's a man who's doing what he is doing based on his principles. But a number of Scheer supporters who are still backing Scheer, not all of them, of course, but a lot of them they're willing to sacrifice their principles for party loyalty. They want a united Conservative Party, but it doesn't seem like it matters to them what is sacrificed along the way. This is why many times I've never really considered myself a partisan. Especially for the last few years, I've not considered myself a partisan. I put more support behind one party. But the only time full disclosure, the only time I ever bought a membership was for the Progressive Conservatives to vote in Doug Ford. That was the only time I ever actually bought a membership, and I don't plan on renewing it now that Doug Ford is in office. I just saw him as the best sort of option. And this is another guy that was told would never win, was Doug Ford, but he managed to do it. So to me, the idea of principles is much more important than party loyalty. Because if you're just going to be loyal to the party, no ifs, ands, or buts, no questioning, then all you're going to do is you're going to, if they start moving more to the left or doing things you don't like, you're going to sacrifice your own principles just to stay loyal to the party. And Maxime Bernier, in my opinion, is making a huge sacrifice because he had a good career. If this does not work out, where can he go? Where has he left to go? Possibly to the Libertarian Party, because they've offered him a leadership in the past, and maybe he wouldn't get the leadership, but he could maybe have a good place in there. But the Libertarians aren't even on the map right now. This is, to me, I see Maxime Bernier's new party as a grassroots party that is going to be for the people, that's going to be a populist platform. And it's possible that I'll be wrong on that. We'll end up seeing what happens, what comes out of it. But all in all, I do think that Maxime Bernier is the best choice that the Canadian people have. He's going to undo a lot of the damage that Justin Trudeau has done, and a lot of the damage that even Andrew Scheer would do as well. I think he could actually work out a trade negotiation with the U.S. much better than either of these two people can. Justin Trudeau, without a doubt, is a weak leader. To me, Andrew Scheer is a weak leader who has been unable to unite the Conservative Party after he was voted in as their leader. And I've said before that Andrew Scheer has done a good job at hammering Justin Trudeau in the House of Commons, but there's plenty of things that he could go after Trudeau that he chose not to, and aside from that, he really hasn't done much as a leader, if you ask me. The only time he's really been ahead in the polls, the Conservatives have been ahead in the polls, is when Trudeau himself ends up screwing up. He ends up doing something controversial, and then they lose support for him. Now, to be fair, Maxime Bernier and some of the things that he said has gained a little more support for Justin Trudeau. For instance, his comments about extreme multiculturalism. That was something that ended up putting more support behind the Liberals and sort of raised their fundraising a little bit. But these are just fleeting numbers. It would never last, and support would be teeter-tottering between the two. But I see Maxime Bernier as somebody that could actually unite the Canadian people behind him and usher in a new era of Canadian politics, something that we desperately need in this country. So that's kind of my opinions on the Conservative Party civil war. Why don't you let me know in the comments below what you think about Max, what you think about Andrew Scheer, and what you think about this whole situation, because I'd really like to hear back from people and sort of get an idea of where everyone else is coming from. Thanks for listening, everyone.